Okay, so this is going to be our last topic for 5-4, which is aspect of demography, where we can create what are called age structure diagrams. And these are a graph of percentages based on the age of members in a population. And we can use these to predict growth based on the shape of the graph. So essentially, the wider it is on the bottom, the faster it's growing. So I'm going to tie this into stuff that I've already gone over this lecture, so make sure you've watched all these other ones. So again, I would ask a lot of questions in class, as you guys know, to have you guys point stuff out if we were looking at the screen. And one of the things I would say is okay, what countries have the most rapid growth? And people look over here, and then they say like Kenya and Nigeria, and I go, okay, where are those countries? And people go, it's in Africa, and then Saudi Arabia, that's in the Middle East. And this links and connects to a map that we looked at earlier that was about growth rates, which was in an earlier part of 5-4. So you should have seen that already. And those match up. Remember, if you remember, Africa was like very red because they had the fastest growth rate, and also places in the Middle East and stuff. So what these bars represent are different age groups. And let me see. Okay, so normally in class I would give you pictures, and you wouldn't need to see this side of the graph. So what this represents are this is like 0 to 4 years old, this is like 5 to 9, and this is 10 to 14 years old. So the blue represents what's called the pre-reproductive age, kids that are before they would be able to start reproducing. So what we see is in the bars, left is male and right is female for the population. So what we see, and they're pretty much equal. Anyway, so just kind of take in the whole length of the bar. And what we see here is 0 to 4-year-olds, babies, represent almost 15%, just babies. 15% of their population are babies. Then we go up another level, and that would be another 12%, and then here another maybe 11. So we're going, 15 plus 12 plus 11, so that's high 30s. I'm just doing this quick and want to keep moving, but maybe 38%, I think, if I did that right in my head. 38% of their population are children, and that represents a lot of kids are being born. That's why the graph looks like this. Then in this area, it's called the reproductive age, and these are considered what's called post-reproductive. People that are, especially women, they reach a point where they can't really make eggs anymore, or release eggs, and so it's at that point, at least women are past the point of reproduction. Men can go further into life and be older, but anyway, so this is considered typically post-reproductive, and you guys would be in this bar technically. So then we look at, okay, these two are very similar to me, so I don't really see much difference between these two. So what we see are countries that have a lot in common: Australia, Canada, United States, Austria, Denmark, and Italy. I go, where are these? And people say Europe. Two of these are in North America, and then Australia's its own thing. And in these 6, the cultures are very, very similar. So go back you should be watching these in order. I talked about how culture is a big part of how fast we reproduce and our birth rate. So in these cultures, there is a lot of expectation for younger girls, even girls your age, to be marrying older men and having children at a very young age, as well as in other cultures. We talked about certain South America, maybe even in Mexico and stuff like that, in different parts of the world, where these cultures and ours, the expectation is different. Women are going to college, they're getting a career going, they're not having children at such a young age, which has actually shrank this area down in blue, causing it to have a slower birth rate and growth rate. And this one, and I kind of call this like the pyramid shape versus like the skyscraper shape. And here, let's compare. So here's the kids, right? This represents about 6% for each bar. So that's 18% are children. Over here, 38%. That's a big difference. And that's, some of that is cultural. And what we also see here is not as many elderly, right? See, the bars are higher here. And so they also have a higher death rate, which we're going to talk about later. People die at a younger age here. And that also connects to actually how much they reproduce. So let's start with the pyramid. So this is called a growing population. So what we see is a pretty small, I don't know about very small, but a small percentage of elderly and a very large percentage of young. And this is because of a very, very high birth rate, often because of cultural reasons. And so they used to use terms like first world and third world, and then that was seen as kind of insulting or like derogatory. And so now they're going with things like developing nations versus developed nations. And again, that AP class that I've been mentioning, the AP, I think it's Human Geography, really great class that Calabasas offers. Definitely check it out. And this is they work on stuff like this and make graphs like this. So developing nations like Mexico, South America, Africa, and some areas of the Middle East would fall into this population. All right, then we fall into what's called a stationary population, which is an almost balanced percent at all age levels, which represents a very low birth rate and low death rate. And obviously, it's going to shrink at the top because we don't have people that are 120 years old, right? So there's not going to be people up here, and maybe these people are in their 90s or something, and whatever. But what we see is not a lot of kids by comparison, and this is in developed nations like the United States, Japan, Australia, and most of Europe. And then we have one that wasn't on the first slide, which takes on what I kind of call like a diamond shape, sort of. And this is actually very rare, and this is represents what's called a declining population. Here we have a very small percent of young and old, so they have a very low birth rate. And this is very uncommon. So this was Italy in 2000. Russia, at least, since I've been teaching, Russia tends to fall into this category. Germany, and China. And we do talk in class about how China initiated population laws and made rules in their country. The government controls pretty much all the resources, and they can make certain types of laws. And their population is so big; it's way over 1 billion. Just for context, I don't even think the United States is over 400 million, and China's like 1.3, 1.4 billion now, or something like that. So they have like 1 billion more people than we do, which is a lot. And so they initiated population control laws. And so if you have more kids than you're supposed to or whatever, the government takes away different like resources from you and has like penalties. So it's like you can, but there's consequences. Whereas Germany, Russia, and Italy, they all did it by choice. And these countries recognized the limiting factors that I talked about before. There's not enough jobs. There's not enough resources. They recognized if they over-reproduce, they would be creating poverty and suffering within their countries, and they chose to reproduce less in response to those limiting factors that we deal with in nature and in human society. And so the United States may be getting close to this, actually. The United States has actually been an agricultural country for a long time, and a lot of farm families actually can have many, many kids. I'm sure some of the students out there are Charger fans, and I think they just cut him actually, but the Chargers have had a very famous quarterback on their team for a long time named Phillip Rivers, and Phillip Rivers has like 9 kids. So that's 2 adults making 9 children. So, and he grew up in like a rural, maybe more like farm kind of community, and those families tend to have more kids so they can help on the farms. And in the cities, you'll see people having less kids, and that ties into the cultural components as well. But in these cultures, they chose to reproduce less, recognizing that it was going to be better for them and their families. And in China, again, they initiated laws. And so the countries that have at least slowed down a lot, the stationary and declining populations, they have reached what's called the demographic transition. So let's break that word down in case it sounds complicated. Transition just means like a change or a shift. And demographic is human population. So it's a shift or change in the human population. And this is a change from high birth and death rates to low birth and death rates, resulting in less reproduction, which creates a more stable system for human society to exist in, where there aren't as many limited resources, and there's more resources available for people. And again, these concepts do apply to other things in nature, but currently, right now, we're talking about human populations, which is called demography. And you might have heard terms like demographics, which is like looking at human populations. So one of the things that's interesting to see here, and usually, again, I ask a lot of questions in class when I lecture, is which line drops first? And if you look, so take a look, and try to figure out, does birth rate drop first or does death rate? So I'm just going to pause for a second so you can analyze it. And what we see is death rate actually has to drop first. And in these countries where that happens, birth rate then goes down too. And so part of why we support other countries in the world and help them is actually because of this transition. It's in a way to also try to help slow down how fast their populations are growing, because if we can help another country's death rate go down with medical support, food support, help them get out of their wars and stuff like that, then the birth rate will eventually go down and they can have a more stable setup in their society and in the ecosystems around them. And but this is what seems to happen, that it's not the other way around, that birth rate doesn't go down first, death rate has to. And so unfortunately though, when we talk about cultural stuff, we may help a culture drop its death rate, but if that culture believes that young girls are supposed to have kids at a young age, it won't necessarily reduce their birth rate. And getting their culture to change, that's really up to them. They need to see the benefit in that in order to enter phase 3 and start reducing. But we are seeing that happening around the world, that a lot of countries are having this happen. They just tend to be the more developed countries, and this is why wealthier nations and more developed countries do help the poorer and more developing nations that are out there. And so, sorry. So anyway, I need some water. So that's basically it. And so the demographic transition is something that we've gone through in other countries, and hopefully in the future we'll see more countries go through this transition as well. And then we'll wrap it up with this picture, which usually shocks people. And it's this like big recreational facility in China, and it just kind of shows just how dense the population is. And I take it back to like limiting factors and talking about, you know, when I was talking about the walruses earlier, let's imagine one of these people has the flu or COVID-19, and I usually just referenced the flu. Sorry, there we go. Now it's clear. I usually just reference the flu in the past, or just have some kind of disease, like a virus. Would it spread fast or slow? And students in the class are always like, it's going to spread fast, and that's because diseases are density dependent, and this is a very dense group of people. And so this ties into social distancing and quarantine stuff, is to reduce this dense crowding and gathering to try to control and flatten that curve of the COVID-19 outbreak, which again ties into what we're learning. Diseases are limiting factors, and will reduce populations, which we're seeing around the world that people are dying from COVID-19, and social distancing directly links to those limiting factors, and creating that space would mean the virus will not spread as fast. So I hope you guys are social distancing and being safe. I've said it before many times. I hope you guys are helping out at home. Again, you guys are important role models for your younger brothers and sisters and cousins and stuff. So they're going to look up to you and see how you handle the quarantine and how you're following the rules. So think about that, and be a good role model for them. And also help out at home. This is a stressful time for everybody. And, try to be supportive to the people around you and your family. And we'll get through this. All right, guys. Next week, we're going to have our last bit of notes on ecology, and it's really, really important stuff. It's going to start getting into like pollution and deforestation and global warming, as well as other things we can do, like solar panels and windmills and organic farming, and how we can start doing things that are less damaging to the planet. So it's a really important topic next week, and that's it for this topic.